this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make a savory shortcut pastry. The fat in this video is the Short Max pastry margarine. This is a great product for sweet shortcut pastry, a pie base, or even a quiche base. It's got a great buttery flavor, is completely vegan and plant-based, kosher and halal certified. So we add our dry ingredients into the bowl. So we got flour, baking powder, skim milk powder. Skim milk powder gives that creamier texture, salt, and we're gonna dry mix these together to incorporate evenly. I'm gonna hit it straight onto speed 2 because it's such a small mix. So that's come together. We're gonna add our Short Max to create a bread-like crumb consistency. So later on, we're gonna be putting together a meat pie. This meat pie is gonna be steak and mushroom with notes of pepper and rosemary through it. This pastry needs to also rest for an additional half an hour before we attempt to roll it out. We need to relax that gluten, particularly with using plain flour in this recipe. It doesn't have that much strength in it. So the longer the rest, the more pliable and easier it is for us to use. So as we can start to see, it's going to bring together and create that breadcrumb consistency. If you take it too far, it's going to become a bit of a paste and start forming like a shortbread. So we want to find that just in between time, which is going to be in about 2 to 3 more minutes. And I've just got a little bit of water here. The thing about adding liquids into pastry is that you've got to assess what's in the bowl. So depending on whether your manufacturer has made a fault in their own ingredient, we could need less, we could need more water. So it doesn't splatter everywhere, I'm just going to turn it off and I'm going to pour about 3/4 of it in. Might need a bit more, but we'll see how we go when it's fully mixed. So as it's going to start to pick up the remaining ingredients around the outside, the Short Max is going to incorporate those ingredients together now to form a dough. And it's going to start picking up off the edges and actually clean the bowl for you. It does half the work. So that's done. We don't want to over mix it. So once it's formed that bowl, then we can take it out into a tub. And we're going to rest it for a minimum half an hour. Just going to give it a roll. Don't want to overwork it at all. Kind of block it up. Makes it easier to roll out and keep that shape as you roll it out. But certainly no more than that. Into a tub. And we'll come back and finish that later on. In this video, we'll be creating 3/4 puff pastry using the MOI Puff Max pastry margarine. Puff pastry is very simple ingredients. It comes with baker's flour, salt, the Puff Max, which is going to get chopped into the dough and then created into a breadcrumb, which then we emulsify with water, and in my recipe today, we're using buttermilk. The great thing about using Puff Max is it's plant-based, vegan, halal, and kosher. In the lamination process, which I'll be showing in a later video, we have Puff Max margarine that I've actually rolled into my own butter sheet. The Puff Max comes in logs. So what I've done is I've weighed 650 grams of Puff Max, which has then been sheeted down to a 2 ml pastry block. Now onto the mixing process. In my bowl, I add my flour and my salt. We then dry incorporate these ingredients together, so the salt is evenly incorporated through the flour. We're gonna add in our Puff Max in pieces. This makes it easier, increasing the surface area. The buttermilk is a higher density, so it's gonna seep to the bottom, so you just wanna incorporate it so it becomes one liquid. And from this, we just start to stream in. So that puff pastry is just formed into a ball. We can now stop it. And what I've prepared earlier, it's just a bread basket, which I've lined with just a bit of spray oil. We're gonna take the puff pastry out. As you can see, it's formed nicely into a ball. You can still see the specks of the Puff Max throughout the pastry. That is totally fine because that's gonna emit better steam when it comes to baking. We're just gently gonna put it together. This dough is a 1 kilo flour to 75% marge, which is 100 grams in the dough to 650 as a pastry block. Fairly simple like that, into the basket, and we come back in half an hour for the lamination process. The dough is now rested. It's now pliable and has softened. I've got my Puff Max sheet, which I am now going to laminate and encase into the dough and do the first 2 folds. In the first 2 folds, I'm going to do a book and then a single. We're looking to keep it the same width as the sheet. We certainly don't want to waste the excess scrap. So because I've just rolled it out a bit too thin, I only took it down to 4 mil. Generally you would take it to 3, but depending on the size of your sheet, you've got to be able to have just double the length. So with the excess scrap, I've now been able to square up and I'm just going to tap it in on top. And that's the first 2 folds done. The advantage of using a margarine is that it can sit at room temperature. So I haven't actually put this in the fridge at all for the resting period. This way it can be really nicely stretched. It's not gonna crack. The advantage of doing a 3/4 puff is that you can see the lamination, the layers forming. So the higher percentage of the fat is allowing me to stretch it thinner and thinner to create more layers, which means more flakiness, better eating quality, and just all-round pastry goodness. So what I've done in the meantime, I've currently rolled the short pastry out to 2 mil. I've lengthened it to half of this tray. I'm gonna get 9 pies. And then I've done my puff pastry down to 2.5 mil, which we will lay on top. To get this into the mold, we just take a bit of scrap and we push it into each individual mold. It's important you do this about 2, sometimes even 3 times, because the pastry needs to relax. This way we reduce that idea of shrinkage. In the odd occasion, you might need a little patch up. Ideally though, in a production scale, you would have big blocks of this and you'd be rolling a whole bench. But for today's purposes, we're just doing it as a demo. So I have my pie filling here that's been cooled down in the fridge. Just gonna go through, fill them right to the top. The last thing you want is a half empty pie. Take our puff pastry and lay it on top. And you're simply going to mold it around. Ideally, you would have a roller and be rolling it around the edges. We'll let them sit for 10 minutes before we put them in the oven, just to let them relax. Give them a brushing with just some egg wash and milk, trying to keep it a little bit even. And most importantly, make an incision on top for steam to escape. This way, we prevent it from overboiling as much. We're going into the oven at 220 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes.